Multi-hazards, all about protecting communities.
Hello, this is Multi-Hazards, the podcast where we take a deep dive into issues in emergency management, climate change adaptation, security, etc. And the overall goal here is protecting communities. So hello again, everybody. Vin Nelson here, and today I'm very thrilled to have special guest Kerry-Ann Charles-Norris here. Kerry-Ann Charles-Norris is a member of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and joined the Cambium Indigenous Professional Services CIPS team in 2017 as the Environmental Partnership Coordinator. Kerry-Ann was proud to serve her community as councilor and has over 17 years experience working within her community. She has worked on bylaw development, waste management, housing, and environmental project coordination and management. For 8 years, she was responsible for researching and developing funding proposals which helped build and sustain her First Nations Environment Department, including the development of community climate change adaptation and implementation plans, not only for her community, but other First Nations as well. She has had great success in initiating and building relationships with various environmental organizations, developing partnerships to coordinate and carry out various environmental activities, as well as promoting education and community involvement in environmental health within her community and others. As a result of this work, Kerry-Ann has gained international recognition and has been asked to speak across Canada, the United States, and Mexico in the area of Indigenous perspectives on environmental stewardship as well as climate change adaptation. Kerry-Ann's wide range of career experiences give her a unique perspective that can be very valuable when assisting other communities wishing to find their balance of operations and environmental stewardship. Well, dear listeners, it's my habit here on each and every Multi-Hazards podcast to say a territorial acknowledgement. I'm borrowing it from the Kwantlen Polytechnic University, or KPU, which is near my home. Here we go. We work, study, and live in a region south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded, traditional, and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Quiquetlam peoples. So these are the names of various First Nations around me here in the west coast of Canada. Now, without further ado, let's get to the interview. Welcome to Multi-Hazards, everybody, and I'm very honored to have Kerry-Ann Charles, and she's basically, I think it's like a 5-hour plane ride from me, where I'm at Vancouver, west coast of Canada. She's all the way over in Ontario, Canada, where the Great Lakes are. So welcome, Kerry-Ann. Good to see that you could participate on our podcast, even though COVID is making everybody either busy or not busy. So, and it sounds like you're on the busy side.
Yeah, it's funny. We've had a lot of conversations working in the environment field about how this has not slowed any of us down.
Okay. Oh, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity to say bonjour or anin, which I think is Anishinaabe.
Anishinaabe, yeah.
Okay. Anyways, I try to do that because I'm trying to be a multicultural person. I've been an English teacher for years, so I always like to learn how to say "How are you" in everybody's language. So, just wondering, how have you been in these crazy COVID times? I think it's been not business as usual.
Not business as usual, no. But just like I was saying, it hasn't really slowed down. It's just we've had to adapt to the situation, and really we've been looked at, I guess, or we've been looking at ourselves here at Cambium as supports and trying to help communities figure out some sort of normalcy through all this.
Right. And so normal meaning what everybody's been doing the last 2-3 years, just the normal rhythm of the seasons and the years, and COVID just comes along and just disrupts all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the environment season or environment field, right? A lot of the work that we do is really dependent on the time of year and being able to undertake specific projects based on season, right? So we've been really the COVID isn't personally hasn't really been a hindrance to me since I've been working with Cambium. I've actually been working from home, so the whole home office, that kind of thing, isn't nothing new to me. But I am definitely missing the personal interactions that I get to do with people in terms of some of my work and a lot of the community engagement portions where I'm traveling and I'm actually meeting with people and doing presentations and that kind of stuff. So that's I think over the last probably month or so is really starting to surface that longing for interaction, social interaction with people other than digitally.
Yeah, and just for our international listeners, Kerry-Ann is in Ontario, which is, I said, it's near the Great Lakes. It's above, I guess, Michigan and all those states in the U.S. And I'm over here in Vancouver, which is just above Seattle and Washington State, California, Oregon, all those places. And it's more, COVID-19 has been much, much worse, like maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 times worse in the province of Ontario than here in BC. So have you felt that at all, or?
We have, just in terms of I guess for us, we're an island community, so we're a small community just north of the Greater Toronto area, about an hour north. So a big concentration of COVID cases are within the Toronto area.
Okay.
So as part of that, our community has a big cottage population that is from that area. And in the beginning, it actually worked out because our ferry broke down roughly around the same time as everybody was sort of locking down and stuff. So it made it hard for transportation back and forth from our community. But over the last month, we've opened it up to the seasonal cottagers to come over. So it's a little bit scary in terms of a community member perspective in having people knowing that people are coming from Toronto and are here within the community. There's a couple of different reasons for that. One is there's only one point of access, right? So there's people within the community that are I guess in contact with people that are coming up from the city. So being such a small community, there's people that interact with each other that necessarily don't think about the other interactions that they have within the community. So it's very small. So thinking about people that are asymptomatic, right? You're not, and it's something that I think about myself, especially with the elders in the community in having that contact and not really thinking about the other people that you've been in contact with that might have been in contact with other people, just because there's that bottleneck of point of contact coming to the island, right? So that's really scary. And at the beginning as well, the transportation with our ferry boat shutting down, we were using what we call a water taxi. So it holds only about 6 people. So it was very hard to social distance at that time as well.
Right.
But we have a small group of first responders here now that the cottage population is allowed back within the community. So it's kind of scary that if they're calling an emergency response for something and our emergency response team gets in contact and somebody comes down with COVID, we're really limited to the people that are trained to do that, right? So there's a couple of different areas there that are a little bit scary that other people wouldn't think about necessarily.
Okay. So on your bio too, it said you're a member of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. So that's the island you're talking about?
That's the island I'm talking about. So we're actually we consist of three islands. And it's the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. Georgina Island being the biggest island, and then we have two, and that's where majority of our residents live that live on reserve. So we have a membership of about 1,000, and we've got about just over 200 that actually live in community. And then, like I said, we have a really big cottage population on Georgina Island. So to put it in perspective, we've got about 90 plus households of members, but then we have about 250 cottagers that own leases within Georgina Island. So it really outnumbers the members. And then the other two islands, Snake and Fox Island, they are what we call our community owned source revenue. So both of those islands are majority cottagers, but they are leased by the band as a whole. So that's part of our own source revenues, where we can put funding into different programming without any strings attached.
Right. Okay. And I saw an article, I think it was from 2 years ago, saying that there was this new arrangement for management and ownership with your First Nation, and then with some other authorities. It was like a CBC article saying it's something new and a little innovative. So people were scared at first of how it would proceed, but I guess that article was, say, 1 or 2 years ago. So you've already been into it. And that's dealing with the cottagers and what happens when their lease runs out.
I'm not sure if you're talking about land under the Lands Management Code. Is that what?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Talking about, and I'm thinking what you're hitting on there is the taxing of our cottagers on reserve, maybe.
Yeah, I just know that it's a very unique situation because being from BC, Canada, I didn't even know what a cottage is. I'm like, what's this cottage? Here, I think we call it cabin. And then on the other hand, in Vancouver, where we live, it seems that most people don't have a cabin. So when people talk about, oh, I'm going to take off for the weekend to the cabin and going for the whole summer to the cabin, it seems kind of a weird concept to us. But in your part of the nation, it's of Canada, it's like a thing. So you got people fleeing every weekend and every summer from Toronto, right? So
absolutely, to cottage country was what they call it, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things there. And again, BC is way different than Ontario, where we are one of a handful of communities that is out from underneath, used to be Indian and Northern Affairs Canada, which is now split into two. So it's Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs Canada in one pillar, and then the other pillar is Indigenous Services Canada. So we have been for several years now, and it's called the Lands Management Act. Have been under the Lands Management Act in regards to being able to manage our own lands without the authority of Indian Affairs sort of governing that, if that makes sense.
Okay. It makes a big difference, right?
It makes a huge difference, just because of the fact that we no longer need permission, and that's sort of what the Indian Act does, is it is the rules and regulations for First Nation communities and how they run and are governed. So under the Lands Management Act, it gives us the authority over our own lands without getting the permission from the federal government to do and implement things within reserve.
Okay. Well, it seems to me that sounds wonderful.
It is. It's definitely a step in the right direction. A big part of that, though, is with any new authority that you're given, right, you also need the resources, capacity, and funding to be able to implement.
Exactly.
Which has been a big I guess, lag in terms of the government in supporting that initiative forward.
Right. I guess in Mexico they would say mucho dinero. It's just that also costs a lot of money.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, you've had, I think, I won't say long, because you're not a senior, but you have been in this field of environmental work for a long time. You have a lot of experience, and I believe that a lot of that work includes climate change adaptation. So I'm wondering how you got into this field.
Yeah, so I give credit to my community for um, the trust that they've given me over the years in working within my own community. So I actually have worked in my own community for many years, wearing many different hats, as many do that work within their own First Nation communities on reserve. Not often are we able to find the resources and build the capacity needed to be as successful as we would like to be, right? There's a lot of different hoops that we have to jump through, and sort of opportunities that we have to jump on regardless of whether we're ready for them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of how my career in the environment fields started. So I was about I think I was like 21 when I was initially a staff member of our First Nation. So I had worked on a couple of different contracts prior to that, just in different areas. So I've worked with our youth at risk programs. I've worked in our daycare. I've worked with our school kids. I've done bylaw development, implementation, and enforcement. I've served a term on council, and that's really where my environment, I guess, future started, or a path. I served a term on council, and I held one of the portfolios that I held was the environment portfolio. And with the experience that I had in doing the bylaw development and implementation, part of that was our building bylaw. So it was really looking at site developments and ensuring that people weren't clear cutting and the environmental significant aspects of that kind of stuff within our community. And the second term that I ran for in council, and I always love this story because I was just saying that to my aunt the other day, people must think it's made up. Mm-hmm. Because of the fact that I ran and I actually got voted out by one vote, which put me down the environment path, because it was a position then my chief and council created for me because of all the work that I had already started in that field, in doing the bylaws and then being on council. So that's where my environment career started. And then just shortly after that, at the time, like I said, it was called INAC, so Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada, came out with their national climate change adaptation funding. Okay. So that was where my climate change work started. I got the proposal put on my desk as the environment coordinator for my community, the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and was asked to develop a proposal around it. At the time, I had no idea what climate change was, so this was about 10 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And I took on the challenge like I usually do. And at the time, I'm a true believer in all about timing, and things line up when they're supposed to, and especially when you're striving to do work for the greater good. So at the time this proposal came across my desk, I had also been appointed to a committee within Ontario called the Lake Simcoe Coordinating Committee, which mm-hmm. was established under new legislation for Lake Simcoe, the protection of Lake Simcoe. So there's an act called the Lake Simcoe Protection Act. So at that time, they were looking at climate change for our watershed, the Lake Simcoe watershed, which my community falls under. And I was put in contact with a fella named Al Douglas, who worked for an organization called OKR, which is the Ontario Centre for Climate Impacts and Adaptation Resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to him, and we developed a proposal that would look at not just developing a climate change adaptation program for my community, but really teaching myself and my community about what climate change was and the reasons that you would need to develop climate change adaptation plans for our community. But at that time, we wanted, and it's something that I've always strived to do, was that just working and being in community and seeing different things over the years, the different barriers and roadblocks to doing projects. I wanted to ensure that the project that we worked on in terms of climate change would be something that not only benefited our community, but it would be something that we would be able to share that would benefit other communities. Trying to tackle and get your head wrapped around what climate change is, and then being able to be proactive in dealing with climate change.
Okay. So your current role, your title is Coordinator of Lands and Climate Change.
Yeah. So my title has actually recently changed as well.
Oh, okay.
It's now Environment Partnership Coordinator.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just because of the fact that when you think about, and personally for me, when I think about environment and I think about climate change, it's sort of looked at as an umbrella that encompasses everything. So and with the people that I get to work with and the projects that I get to do, although they stem from the land and are focused in a lot in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation, it helps people break down those silos in terms of things that you need to do together in partnership, regardless if it's in the environment field or if it's in economic development or if it's in health. All of those things are connected. So my title has changed to, like I said, Environment Partnership Coordinator,
Okay.
because it's all connected in some way. And we really like to be able to point that stuff out to people when we're moving forward.
Okay. And so in your role, you're not just dealing with Georgina Island First Nations, you have a broader role, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my I guess what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say target, but for a lack of a better word, I've been working with conservation authorities within Ontario over the last several years. And again, it's everything that I'm doing now in my role with Cambium stems from stuff that I had already started doing within my own community.
Okay.
And the benefits and the resources and capacity that have come out of these projects and partnerships that I've been so privileged to be able to build over the last 10 years since I've been doing this kind of work. And the conservation authorities is one of those partnerships where I, especially when you talk about in Ontario and the relationships between the Indigenous communities and the non-Indigenous communities, there's a lot of tension there, especially when it's organizations like the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry or the Ministry of Environment and Parks and no, it's no longer climate change, but all of these different ministries that are associated with government. There's not very good relationships there because of certain treaties and treaty rights and land claims and stuff and experiences from the past, where it's really different in BC out that way because a lot of those treaties and stuff weren't part of the history there. Mm-hmm. So being able to move forward, and I'm sure you've heard of Truth and Reconciliation, right. Calls to action and that kind of stuff. So a lot of that stuff, especially the truth part, really relay back to the environment and environmental work that needs to be connected to and really taken into consideration moving forward. So when I look at stuff like that, and again, going back to the conservation authorities and the work that I've been able to do with my own community and being able to build that relationship and that trust, which is key to any project and any relationship moving forward. You have to be able to understand the past to know where you are at the present to be able to move forward for the future in a good way. So, you know, the title change for me and not just looking at environmental projects, but as a broad, being able to help people understand what that history is and what the truth part of truth and reconciliation is, in order for people to understand where our communities are at and the importance, not just for them, but for our communities as well, to understand what relationships and moving forward in a good way can be if both parties understand each other first, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so in terms of the work that I get to do, although it's very focused, like the broader picture is environment, there's all of these other things underneath, or I guess underneath that umbrella of environment, that have to be looked at as well. So, you know, when we're talking climate change, the same thing. It's an umbrella that encompasses everything because it has an effect at some point or another with everything else, be it tourism, be it recreation, be it economic development, be it infrastructure. You know, I view the work that I do and in relaying it all back to environment as the same. It's just the environment and climate change are sort of an umbrella to help break down those silos that are there of all of these other departments. Right. So I get to, going back to the conservation authorities, with the relationships that I've been able to build with my community, with our local conservation authority, and the projects and benefits and capacity and resources that were then made available for our community, as well as the conservation authority, have just been, I guess, astronomical in terms of if we were still working in our silos, right? Where this is, I'm not sure if you've heard of the saying two-eyed seeing.
Who I've seen, sorry?
Oh, two-eyed seeing it's called.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a philosophy actually that has been termed by a Mi'kmaq community member in Nova Scotia, and it really talks about the importance of being able to understand both sides. So you've got the Indigenous side, where we have that connection to the land, and we've got tradition and values that are ingrained in us, in being able to move forward and adapting and mitigating climate change through a different lens. And then you've got sort of the European Western science side that, you know, has some really good information and helps to identify adaptation and mitigation measures moving forward. But if you take both of those views and you put them together, you get a robust sense of what's happening and how to move forward in a good way. So there's a lot of stuff like that I get to do in my work. And the commonality, actually, really, when you think about it, is everything stems from the land, right? It's just being able to communicate it to people, that they understand that everything that is provided for them and sustains them, although, you know, they're going to a store to get it, ultimately comes from the land at some point, right? All of those origins come from the land. So to be able to understand that moving forward, especially when you're looking at climate change and how things work and how we should be reconnecting with the land in which sustains us, to be able to understand what these changes of climate change are what the effects are going to be and how we adapt and mitigate. It's so important to be able to observe what's going on and not just, have run tests, much like we do with the scientific stuff, is that we have these models that we run things through, right, to sort of guesstimate what's going to happen. But if we can, stop and listen to the land and take those and observe what the changes of the land are, they're actually giving us signs in regards to what we should be doing and preparing for, and actually how to prepare for that moving forward. And if we put those two together, and that's really where the climate change work that I do with communities stems from, is we look at the traditional ecological knowledge, which are the observations and the knowledge that the community members hold within their space, their communities, and the stories that they've heard from generations to generations about what those changes are, and to be able to put that together with the modeling and not have either one of them separate. That's how we have developed our framework for mitigating and adapting to climate change.
Right. Right. So obviously what you're talking about is kind of like the Indigenous perspective on not just climate change, but the environment. And I just want to tell you, some of my experience. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up outside of Vancouver, and I didn't know anything about First Nations, didn't know a thing. But there was this TV commercial from the US. It was this man in this canoe, and he was paddling across a lake, and he was dressed in like 1880s garb. And then some people nearby were just dumping a bunch of garbage into the lake. And then this man, who I believe he was supposed to be First Nations, he started like just a tear started going down his cheek. And then later on, there was this documentary called Real Injun, where it was discovered this is an Italian-American actor. He wasn't First Nations at all. But as a kid, I just got the impression from that commercial, whether it was a non-Indigenous actor or not, but I just had that impression that First Nations people love nature, and people who are not First Nations probably don't. So that's the message I got when I was just like 6 or 7. And then fast forward to 2020, and it seems like a big myth, but from what I've seen, there is a lot more respect in Indigenous communities for nature, and a realization, climate change is real. It's not fake. It's not a hoax, and we got to deal with it. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about that?
I just had a call. We did and I know there's a lot of work out your way on the Indigenous protected spaces. Have you heard of that work out there, where it's either the Indigenous communities are managing themselves protected spaces that are within their traditional territory or areas of significance for them? There's like either they're managing these spaces, or there's a co-management between, be it the provincial or federal government. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about that kind of stuff here, and how that would work here in Ontario. And there's an organization called Ontario Nature that's sort of leading this, and they had a Zoom meeting on on Thursday about it. And it was something that's really I tried to relay to the people that were on the call, a majority of them being non-Indigenous, is that being an Indigenous person, and especially this time in life that we're living right now, where, for many years at Contact, when the settlers got here, our perspectives on protecting spaces and ensuring that there's the sustainability there from Mother Nature that is in balance. That's just something that's ingrained in us as Indigenous people. It's really hard to hard to articulate, I think. It's just something that we know. And when you talk about colonization and you talk about, truth and reconciliation and residential schools and stuff like that, and the generation that I'm in, where it was my dad's generation that had to deal with residential school and all of that, really being torn apart and disconnected from what our values and our culture and our teachings are, where my generation now, and you can see it a lot in, especially when you're talking in the environment field, where there's a lot more talk about Indigenous perspectives and ensuring that the Indigenous perspectives are being not only talked about, but meaningfully talked about and incorporated into policy and procedures and projects moving forward in the future, especially when you talk about climate change, that we are thankful, grateful, myself, and again, these are my opinions, for this opportunity and finally, starting to have our voices heard and encouraged. But what we really need is the support for us to be able to, what we're calling, re-pick up our bundles and relearn and trust that the values and traditions that we hold as Indigenous people about the environment are being supported so that we can articulate what's in our hearts and what's just in our spirits to the non-Indigenous community about how things should be managed and sustained in a balanced way moving forward. So, like I said, it's really hard to articulate those connections that we just have as Indigenous people, and those teachings that are just there that most people that are non-Indigenous don't understand. So if you look all over the world, and again, I'll bring Mexico into this. The Indigenous people there have the same understanding as we Indigenous people here in Ontario have about our environment, about their environment, but it's often hard for us to put in writing or articulate so that anybody that's not Indigenous can understand the feelings that we're having. So in that meeting with Ontario Nature, I think that's one of the biggest points that I wanted to make, was that we're so connected to the environment in feeling that it's just something that's been there and ingrained in us for millennia, right? And these stories and these prophecies that we have that need to be looked at, although we don't, if you ask me right now what those are, I can probably tell you what some of them are, but we're still needing now, we know they're there, we just need to be able to find them and resurface them and then be able to share that with the non-Indigenous community, especially when we're thinking and looking at, climate change adaptation and mitigation and what those effects are. We already know that, if we don't stop and look at nature and start to, work with our relatives that are not of the human species in moving forward, that if we're just continuing to work as a human species, thinking that, we're the all, be all end all in saving and working through these issues, we're not going to get anywhere, right? We need to stop and reconnect the Indigenous people with our roots and our environment, and be supported in doing that, so that we can then, and that's sort of one of the responsibilities in our teachings as well as Indigenous people, is that was the gift that was given to us from the Creator, was that connection with the environment that we've been supposed to share with the other races within the world, but we've been suppressed in doing that. So we need the support and the effort from the non-Indigenous communities, which we're getting, but we're not getting it at the level that's needed to be able to move forward in the way that we should be moving forward when we're talking about climate change and the changes that are coming that we have to work together on.
Right.
I hope
And
that makes sense.
can I just extend this for a second? It's kind of off script, but I read a book, or I didn't read every page, but I last summer. It's called Climate Leviathan, and there was an author from Simon Fraser University near me, and one from the U.S. And let's see, Jeff Mann and Joel Wainwright. So they were looking into the future and saying, what's going to happen with climate change? So they said there's like 4 options. One is that the world will go under a continuing capitalism and the way it is, but it'll all be nations that ignore each other and just fighting for scarce resources. And then another scenario is if there's a global government that's like sort of communist or Maoist, and they just enforce all the climate change regulations and they disperse with capitalism. And then another one, I think it was like, they were like right-wing fascist government that takes over the world. But the last one, they said the sort of the salvation of humanity was Climate X, which they couldn't define, but it's basically grassroots, democratic. And in that chapter, they basically talked about the Mexican Zapatistas. Hope I'm saying that right. But they said that indigenous perspectives on climate change will basically be needed as the main idea, the main thesis of this Climate X, this movement to save the world. So I know I was reading and I was like, wow, that's kind of a big burden to put on all indigenous peoples. But at the other hand, that like might be one of the main keys, because we've been ignoring indigenous voices for centuries. And now humanity's in a crisis, and we need not just, I won't say the best voice, but the most like scientific voice, the voice that matches nature the way it is, right? Not that we impose.
Most connected, I think, is the word.
Mm-hmm. Sorry?
Right? The most connected.
Yeah, the most connected. So the problem is we haven't been connected. That's what put us into this mess. And so, as you're saying, the indigenous perspective on climate change is basically reality. It's nothing you made up, sitting around the campfire or in the classroom. It's something that's natural, right? So, and that's something that you speak on, right? You've been going to conferences I saw online, and that's something that people maybe now are a little more interested in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's one of those things I go back to my point of the indigenous perspective is actually being asked for now in environmental work, right? It's being realized that, like you said, it's a very important, if not the most important, and in my perspective, it is the most important piece of this puzzle moving forward. Mm-hmm. It's funny that you talk about that book that you read, because this, in my generation and where I'm at, I'm sort of in the middle of like that. I'm growing up to be hopefully one day looked at as an elder. But at this point in time, because of residential school and that kind of thing, there's been a really big disconnect between our elders and our youth. Mm-hmm. And those elders are the ones that, sort of pass on that knowledge and those teachings from generation to generation, right? So that's where I reference that re-picking up our bundles, where, with the whole residential school and colonization and get rid of the Indian problem, that is a real thing. It's not just something that, us Indigenous people just term just because, but it's actually, that's part of our history was get rid of the Indian problem. So as part of that, a lot of our elders, unfortunately, are passing away that hold that knowledge. So it's becoming very critical for people like myself who are, in their 40s, mid 40s, in that generation, that we weren't, that knowledge wasn't passed down to us. So we're seeking that out, and it's very difficult in communities. I know, for instance, for my community, there's not a lot of knowledge keepers in regards to the traditional knowledge of the environment here for me to go to. So I'm often finding myself having to go outside of my community to other communities and talk to other elders, and then I'm hoping to be able to reintroduce that stuff back into my community.
So if you go to other communities, though, what those elders are saying is very similar, though.
Yeah, and then it's just bringing it back, bringing back in that context and bringing it to your own community and trying to figure out how that fits in your own community, right? Because that's another thing where traditional ecological knowledge is very place-based. So it's those observations, and that's the territory. That's why, with our people, we're very place-based, right? So we traveled with the seasons and that stuff, but we had a territory that we did that in. So we're very familiar with our territory. And those elders that know the land within our territory that intimately are, like I said, unfortunately passing. So they're taking all that information with them. So as part of something that I do is I'll go speak with other elders, and it could be that it's an elder from a different community within the same territory, or it could be an elder from another community outside of our main territory. But the context that they give it to me, I'll bring it back to my community, and then I'll try to figure out how that fits, if that makes sense.
Doesn't sound easy.
No, it's not easy at all. But I think that being an Indigenous person, it makes it easier because you've already got a feeling, right? You've got a feeling about something. And I think with me, not being able to find an elder in my own community to talk about that feeling with makes it difficult. But to be able to be, I guess, validate that feeling with another elder is sort of how I go.
Right.
So it sounds complicated, and it is very complicated because of the fact that there's so many barriers in place to be able to explore that, right? So in terms of trying to connect and, I guess, articulate the Indigenous perspectives to somebody that's not Indigenous and has no idea, not even an inkling about what that perspective looks like. It's being able to now find a way to communicate that makes sense to them. So in terms of Indigenous perspectives in climate change, for instance, right, it's being able to identify, for me anyways, it's being able to identify a commonality with that non-Indigenous person, and then sort of come up with analogies that make sense to them on how we feel and see things, those observations about moving forward. But it brings me back to what you were saying about that book, in terms of we have prophecies as well, right? So right now we have a prophecy that it's a seven fires prophecy, and it sort of talks about a lot of milestones in the past for Indigenous people that have led us to what we're dealing with right now, in terms of really starting to get our voices and being part of the conversation about what our future looks like for our 7 generations, and how important it is that it's not just heard, but it has really started to be looked at and incorporated in a meaningful way. So right now in our prophecies, we're at what we call the 7th fire. And at that 7th fire, it's sort of similar to what you talked about in the book. We're at a fork in the road right now. And that fork in the road, will determine whether or not that eighth fire is lit or not. So, the first fork represents the path that we're going down right now, where it's all technology, that, we're not thinking about the environment, that we're very destructive, and then we're killing what sustains us, which is the earth, that, this will be it. The fire will be out. And then the other side of that is that, we start to realize that, so that's sort of what we say, we continue down the white path. So the other fork is that, we really start to realize what really sustains us. We start to get reconnected with the environment and nature, and start to listen to our original teachers, which are those beings within nature, the animals, the four-legged, the swimmers, the birds, which are the flyers, the trees, the plants, all of that stuff, that we really start to reconnect and observe and listen to what they're telling us the future should look like, and how to proceed. And that's what lights the eighth fire. And that's what we call the red road, the red path, following those, going back to and connecting with the Indigenous, and allowing the Indigenous people, I guess, to uphold their responsibility of ensuring that we have that sustainability within on Mother Earth, that we were supposed to be able to, that we were gifted with, in being able to understand what that is, to share with the rest of the world.
Right. So I'm just fast forwarding here on the questions that I had given you. So I'm just wondering, for example, Greta Thunberg in Sweden, she's like a teenager, and then she gets out, and nobody would have expected that she gets big. And I saw online, people were wondering, is she Sami, like First Nation from northern Sweden or Norway? Because they were wondering, she has this vibe that seems indigenous, some people thought. And so I just thought that the climate change protests that were happening all over the world with youth, I'm just wondering, do you see any connection there?
I do. I see a connection that with Greta, I think she's awesome. And it's just one of those things where, again, there's here in Ontario, there's Autumn Peltier, who's
Mm-hmm.
also, this big advocate for water rights and climate change and stuff too. And it's unfortunate that, Greta, I think
Gets
that
the spotlight.
Exactly. Autumn's been doing this work since she was like 9-10 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Under her aunt, that really started the movement. So it's unfortunate, again, where you see that imbalance of people listening to someone that hasn't claimed to be Indigenous, but has awesome perspectives and is doing awesome things to move in the right direction. But that spotlight didn't hit the Indigenous person that has been doing this, same age, been doing this for quite some time, until that non-Indigenous person spotlight came upon it, right? So came upon her. So with that being said, I think absolutely. I think being youth, this is their future, right? So I really love the fact that there's so many youth that are stepping up to the powers that be, that are often, those elderly, now senior people, that aren't going to be here to see the effects that
Mm-hmm.
our youth have to live in.
Right.
So, and for Indigenous people, right, for Anishinaabe, we are told that we're supposed to be looking 7 generations ahead. So everything that we do now, we're supposed to be thinking that if it has a detrimental effect on that seventh generation that will be born, that, there's no questions that that's something that we don't do.
Right.
And again, too, right, that it goes the same, that, we're supposed to be looking 7 generations behind as well, to take a look at what's happened in the past to lead us to where we are now, so that we don't make those same mistakes either.
Right. It seems that that 7 generation scenario kind of matches the climate scientists when they do all that modeling, like they say like 2050 and 2100, and I think people roll their eyes like, wow, that's just way too far to think about. Like, what about 2025? What about 2030? But having that long-term perspective, I mean, that's necessary, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and it happens a lot. I've had these conversations with a number of people, and it's sad because of the way that our societies are structured, and the way the government's structured, is that often, because of the short periods of time that people are in, quote, power, right? That's that 4 year that really they really focusing on.
Mm-hmm.
So we're almost trained to think just that short period of time because of how our society works. But it's something that we all forget. And I say this a lot because it's funny, that I think all over the world, when you're being taught in the education system, you're taught about the web of life, and how within that web, when one piece is taken out, how it affects the rest of the web, even if it's, not in a short period of time, but over a longer period of time. And that's something that, as we get to be adults, we seem to forget about that important lesson. I think it's in grade 3 or grade 4, right?
Right. That is a really refreshing perspective, because there's the author Naomi Klein, she calls this thing, it's called extractivism. Basically, that looking at the earth and just saying, what can I get out of it? Are there minerals under that soil? Oh, look at those trees. I don't see trees. I see future IKEA desks, right? It's just that way of looking at nature. And that's what drives our entire system here in Canada and most countries. So yeah, I just find this really refreshing to get more like a nature perspective.
Yeah, it's again, speaking with some of my elders, and it's too, reterming things. I think we need to redefine thinking, because of the fact that we've already got ideas and perceptions around certain terminology, right? So, for instance, one of my elders from Nawash First Nation, we had a conversation about even, and I do some work with the Ontario Professional Planning Institute around planning, right? And it's one of the things that it's a term that's used for every municipality, even every community, and it's called land use planning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the word use itself is so derogatory. So instead of calling it land use, my elders, like, we need to reterm that and start calling it land relationship planning, because then we're starting to think about our reaction with the environment as a relationship, and how we sustain each other, and not just how we're using the land. And with those simple changes in terminology, it allows people to start to think differently, rather than, if you say land use, people already have a predetermined definition of what that's supposed to be. So it's really hard to get out of that thinking. But if you change the terminology a little bit and redefine, people can learn something rather than unlearn something.
Mm-hmm. It seems that this whole idea about looking at the land differently, that's one of the keys to everything, is just to instead of looking at that, saying, how can I use it? I did real estate for a couple of years, totally failed, but I was just amazed at how we're commodifying pieces of land, the forest nearby, the river, and it's all seen in economic terms, and it feels uncomfortable, but it's the way things are and have been going. So we need to it's almost like a revolution in the way we think about land and how we treat it. So
it's yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there with that. Another one of my elders has also actually said that we stopped upon colonization, we stopped looking at our environment and that what sustains us as community, and we started thinking of it as commodity, right? Mm-hmm. And so that relationship changed. And it's funny because I did another panel. This was last year sometime, and just before I did the panel, it was for the public health unit in Peterborough, and one of the questions from the audience was, in moving forward in climate change, what is it that we should be doing? And the morning before that panel, I had a discussion with an elder, and I actually posed that question to him. And one of the things that he said was, what we need to do is we need to go sit in the bush and listen. We're not listening to what nature is telling us on how to prepare. And that's something, in the day and age that we're in right now, everything's so fast paced that we don't have time to sit and listen. But that's critical, and that's key to being able to mitigate and adapt to climate change, is actually just making sure that we're taking that time and we're listening and really observing our teachers in the environment.
Mm-hmm. So it's like we're not like imposing our own imaginations onto nature, but we're letting nature kind of tell us, it's like, hey, this is the situation and this is the future. You better, do something. Because I think most of the time we have this knee-jerk reaction. We say, okay, technology will fix it. Oh, our money will fix it. We just need to, apply for more funding or something along the lines of what's been going on for hundreds of years. So it's time to actually find out what is nature saying to us. So not in a metaphysical way, but in a real way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a little story here I'll share with you. I sit on Crown Indigenous Relation and Northern Affairs Canada. They have multiple funding streams for climate change work. So I sit on a review panel with a number of people from across the country, and we have these discussions around proposals and projects that are being proposed. And there's on one of my committees, there was a guy from Manitoba that gave such a great story in terms of what nature can tell us. So he's from Manitoba, and I might get the dates wrong, but he's a hunter and has been on the land. He's in his late 40s now and has been on the land since he was a very small child. And he was saying that in 2009, I believe it was, he was out hunting, and they came across this in the fall. They came across this beaver building this great big beaver dam. It was like 3 feet high, and they thought to themselves, they couldn't understand, why that was happening. So that spring, there was, I think it was one of the major floods in Manitoba. So wow. He never really connected that at first. And then again, he said, I believe it was a couple of years later in 2011, and you can look up these dates in terms of when these floods happened. But again, they were out on the land, and there again was in the fall, there was this beaver building these great big dams, and they couldn't understand why. And again, then that spring, there was another major flood, and that's where he made the connection between the beaver and the the dams that they were making, because the beavers knew that that flood was coming. So they were preparing themselves.
It's
So
almost
those
like
are the
the
sort of
stories
things.
of like animals before an earthquake or tsunami. They pick it up, they pick up the signal, and they're like fleeing, and all these people are going, "Hey, what's going on with that flock of birds?"
That's exactly it. And they know way ahead of time, right? And these are all teachings that Indigenous people hold. And that's where say we need that time and the resources and capacity to be able to re-pick up our bundles and relearn these teachings. They're there. We know they're there. We can feel them. We just can't articulate them properly yet to those and share that responsibility of how we can be sustaining what sustains us in a balanced way.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so now I'm just kind of fast forwarding to last couple questions here. If you don't mind, I want to be respectful of your time. And I know you're in the afternoon, right? So what is your vision for like right now and the future for yourself and the organization you're working for, your community, and how you can advance what you have been calling the Indigenous voice about adapting to climate change here and abroad?
So my vision is one. First, I go back to um, really being able to help people understand what the truth is of truth and reconciliation. Because I think if we don't change the perspectives of what Indigenous communities in Canada are perceived to be, which is, poverty stricken, alcoholics, that kind of stuff. If we don't change that narrative, then our perspectives and the knowledge that we hold is never going to be taken seriously. And that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be taken seriously, right? So I always say that, you can't, and that's something that's happened in Canada, unfortunately. They have the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, but it wasn't like when that all happened, all the airwaves were shut down and all the broadcasting focused in on the apology of that. So very few people really know what the truth of truth and reconciliation is. So they're being forced to reconcile, but they don't know what they're reconciling. So that's causing even more friction between the Indigenous communities and the non-Indigenous communities, and not allowing for that Indigenous perspective to be taken into consideration in the meaningful way that it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of that. That's the first step, is really having people have the full understanding of why our communities are in the situations that they're in. Right? It's not something that we've done to ourselves. It's something that it's colonization. And then the second part of that is then building what I call respectful reciprocal relationships. So, and that really goes to the work that I started talking about with the conservation authorities, and from my own experience, being able to build that respectful reciprocal relationship with, the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, which is the authority that looks after the watershed that our community is in. So, being able to have them understand, as well as our community understand, both sides, right? Because with the Conservation Authority as well, they're misrepresented, because with community, and coming from my perspective, when I first started working with them, when you hear Conservation Authority, you think of government, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of Indigenous communities will be like, yeah, no, we don't want to work with government. There's bad blood there. There's water, you know what I mean? Burnt bridges, that kind of stuff. So once you know the truth, to be able to build those respectful reciprocal relationships and that trust, which is the foundation of that, I think would be the second step in that. And then, having those relationships built and moving forward with both the two-eyed seeing, with both being able to have the Indigenous perspective and the understanding of what that is, and the Western science perspective and the understanding of what that is and vice versa for both involved, and then being able to move forward with, okay, we've got two brilliant pieces of information here. How do we bring that brilliance together to be able to move forward in a good way that is beneficial for everybody involved? There are no boundaries in environment, right? And I think people need to really stop and think about that as well, that just because there's a line on the map, it doesn't mean that that bird's not going to fly over that line to get a worm that's going to feed its family, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I'm just wanted, just can I, for a couple minutes, just tell you a quick review of my background, like how I got interested.
Sure.
So yeah, I had to come back from Asia. There was like a family tragedy that forced me to come back to Vancouver, and I was like, oh, what should I do now? And I don't know what kick-started it, but I started like going to Vancouver Library, reading up on books on Canadian history. Anytime there was a First Nations like powwow or this or that, I went and I participated, and I got to know some people. And I remember just like reading the history at late night on my kitchen table. And I'm sorry to say, I don't want to sound like a weepy guy, but I wept a lot. And my first reaction was this kind of guilty feeling, thinking, oh my God, I was born in Vancouver, where I should be in Norway. What the hell am I doing here? And why did my parents come here? Why did my grandparents come here? What have we done? And then later I started to find out, well, I'm kind of stuck here. I don't think Norway will take me back. And so what do I do? Right? Guilt is not just, it's not a useful feeling, right? I need to look at the truth. I need to look at reality. And I need to, basically, at the end of everything is, I need to do what's right. I need to be a human who does what is proper and right to all my fellow humans. So that was like, let's say 10 years ago. And I've always been wondering, like, what can I do to just do the right thing? And I don't even have a lot of connections with the First Nations people here in my community. I think most of them here, we have tiny places where there are reserves along the Fraser River, but most of our First Nations people, and Métis, maybe a few Inuit, they're all from outside, and then they come here. But as a settler descendant, I have like no way to kind of connect. Maybe I pass people in the shopping center, but needless to say, I would like to be involved, and I've prepared my mind for that whenever the chance comes, I'll take it. So I do think that a lot of people here in Canada and US and many other countries where colonization has taken place, it's like the history, that's like hundreds of years. It's a lot to digest. And then the other thing is like, it needs to be digested. And then after, it's like, okay, what constructive things can I do? Not just sit on it, or not just throw up my hands and just say, wow, it's overwhelming. So anyway, that's from my Norwegian Canadian settler perspective, and just the kind of inner turmoil that I've been dealing with. So yeah, I know it's a long story.
No, it's, and you're not the only one. With the training that we do, we do Indigenous aware training, and 9 out of 10 people that we talk to about the truth, about truth and reconciliation and the true history of Canada, they don't know. And I often say this is that, you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know, right? So until those opportunities are present, which they haven't been readily available to learn about Canada's true history, people aren't going to know. So I think with me, and I've had people say this to me after we're done, our training sessions, and they've started to get a grasp on, Canada isn't really the Canada that you thought it was built on. And that's it, exactly. They're like, we feel guilty, even though it wasn't this person specifically that has done any wrong. They feel guilty because they didn't know, and now they don't know what to do. And that's exactly it. And it's something that I say, it's like, I don't want you to feel guilty, right? But you need to know, that truth in order to understand where we are in the present and to be able to make, wise decisions for the future that aren't going to go back to or repeat those mistakes that have happened in the past. And I think one of the biggest things for me and why I've really embarked on the path that I am in terms of environment, not only just environment and climate change and being proactive and helping our communities be proactive instead of reactive in regards to moving forward, because we've ever since contact, we've been put in the position of always just being reactive. We don't have the resource capacity, and it was set up that way because it was part of get rid of the Indian problem, right? To be proactive. But part of that for me, I think, is that I live both sides. So my mom is non-native. She's actually Newfie. Both my grandparents on that side are right from Newfoundland. And then my dad is Ojibwe from Georgina Island. Actually, his dad's from Georgina Island and his mom's from Cape Croker area, Bruce Peninsula area. So that's sort of, it's not the path that I chose for myself. It's sort of been chosen for me. And the work that I get to do is so gratifying because of the fact that I'm able to, I think, process both perspectives, and then I'm able to then communicate it on both sides that's understandable for each. So I'm sort of that I guess that navigator of muddy waters
Right.
to help build and really strengthen what I term as respectful reciprocal relationships. We're all in this together, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, any of that, right? This is one world that we all have to understand each other's perspectives to be able to move forward in a good way that's sustainable and balanced for every being, not just the human race, but for those plants and animal beings that really don't need us, that we need them.
Now, if there are some young people out there, especially, say, First Nations youth here in Canada, or say in the US or other places, do you have any advice if they want to do this kind of environmental or climate change adaptation work?
One, yeah, just if you have a passion, go after it. Especially when it's in regards to helping the environment, because this is their future. Reach out, ask questions. I had a meeting this morning with a youth, and that's something that I said to her is that, you know what, if I was 20 years younger knowing what I know now, there are no such things as stupid questions. If you don't ask questions, you're not going to get the answers that are needed, and assuming creates problems that you don't want to encounter most times, right? So yeah, and that there are a ton of people out there that can be awesome role models, and it's not just a one-way relationship. I have to say that with the youth that I get to work with, I learn so much, so that, understand that in pursuing a career in environment or any other career, when you seek somebody out that's already in that position, don't think of it as a one-way road. Think of it as a two-way road, because we're learning from them as well, right? We don't know everything, and they're different perspectives, especially moving forward. We need to understand, and I think the older generation, the baby boomers, it's harder for them than the Generation X, which is my generation, to understand that we're working towards their future, not our future, and that needs to be identified and recognized, and for them to actually point that out to people, that this is their future, just like Greta and Autumn are doing, right? This is their future that we're responsible for right now. It's something that in our culture as well, is that this land isn't ours at the present. We're borrowing it from our future generations.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember 2 years ago when I decided, actually, my story is that I had a neighbor who died in my apartment building. And I went with my younger son, we went to visit him and his family in the hospital before he passed. And then it was, I hadn't been to a funeral in a few years. And so and I asked his wife the next day, I phoned her and said, so how is your husband doing? Oh, he passed away last night. And it just shocked me. It really shocked me because I hadn't been to a funeral for maybe, I don't know, at least 5 years. So it was not fresh in my memory. And then there were some other situations, and I kept looking at my kids at night, and I said, if I could do anything in the whole world, what would I do? And I said, well, I would deal with climate change, and I would deal with these things. Just even though I don't know how or to get into it, I have to do this for the next generation, because they're not going to have 50 years of, great weather and like no extreme weather events that I have. Look at COVID-19. I never had COVID-19 when I was a kid. So yeah, as you were saying, Kerry-Ann, just looking to the next generation, and, I don't know what they think when they see us or hear us saying these kind of things, but hopefully that they will say, okay, old man, I'll work with you. So I just wonder, is there one last message that you would like to leave with the audience?
I think one last message that I would like to leave with the audience, and it's something that I say quite often, is that, you know what? We're all just people. We're all here for our own reasons. We all have gifts and expertise, and we need to start looking at each other with our uniqueness, rather than lumping ourselves in groups and trying to be something that we're not, right? We need to start thinking with our hearts rather than just with our minds. We need to be able to put those two together. It's something, I guess, and it's sort of in my perspective, and I've had these conversations with other people as well, as an Indigenous person, upon contact, it's our kindness that has really helped and assisted the government in that assimilation, colonization process, because we were so kind at the beginning, that we got taken advantage of. But it's that kindness that's also going to get us out of this mess that we're in, when we're looking at climate change and what do we do moving forward. We got to put our differences aside, because when we're placed on this earth, it's actually, I'll leave you with something that my cousin said to me that's really over the last month has really resonated with me, and allowed me, I guess, to really think as an individual person in that connection that Indigenous people have with nature. He's like, you know what? When a robin wakes up in the morning, it doesn't look around and want to be like that blue jay. It wakes up in the morning and it's a robin. So that's exactly what it focuses on, is being a robin, right? So that's something that really resonated with me in terms of, we wake up, especially our future generations and the younger generations right now, with so much technology and media and all this kind of stuff, that we're conditioned to think that we have to be like somebody else and we have to have what somebody else has. But really, when it comes down to it, and if we start to absorb some of those teachings and lessons from our natural environment, is that all of those species that are out there have their own gifts. They are their own unique being, and that's all they strive to do. They strive to to do their part in keeping the environment safe and sustainable and healthy, that biodiversity, where as people we need to really stop and think about that. When you wake up, be you. Don't strive to be somebody else, and do the good things that you can do. Everybody's got gifts that they need to share. We just need to be able to be open with each other, to be able to know that we're not perfect and we don't know everything. And those that think they know everything have some issues to work through. So, that meaningful communication with each other, that respect for each other, and being able to have those reciprocal, respectful relationships, I think, is really the message that I would want to leave people with.
Okay, and sorry, I would just like to ask one more question, because everything you said, it reminds me of, I went to many First Nations, say, meetings or celebrations or whatever here, and I keep hearing people say, and sometimes they would like lift up their hands partway, and they say, all my relations. So what exactly does that mean? And that, I think, isn't that connected to what you just said?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, again, we are conditioned to think that human beings are the be all end all of this earth that we live on, which is far from the truth. Our creation stories, if you look, and Indigenous people have their own creation stories, their own teachings, their own traditions, that kind of stuff. But if you look around the world, Indigenous people have the same values, really. And that is that we are the babies of this earth. Everything else was here before us and will continue to be here after we're all gone. And that is what all our relations is that we are related to everybody and everything. We are all connected in some way, shape, or form, be it, like I said earlier, the winged ones, they're our relatives. They have their teachings, they have their responsibilities that they carry out. The tree and plant species, the four-legged, all the animals, we've got the swimmers. Those are all our relations.
That's wonderful. Well, I think we've come to the end now. I wish I could keep talking for 2 more hours, but thank you so much, Kerry-Ann. I really appreciate the time that you've taken and all these rich and I think just enlightening and wonderful things that you've been saying. So have a great week, and thank you so much for being part of this Multi-Hazards podcast.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Vin. And I really enjoyed myself. And again, thank you for allowing me to give my perspective and the opportunity to, again, have another avenue for, the Indigenous voice to be heard.
Exactly. Okay, well, you have a wonderful, late afternoon and evening. And thanks again. Just, I really appreciate it.
No problem, Vin. Take care. Thank you. Bamapi.
Okay, take care. Bye.
There it is, an insightful interview with Kerry-Ann Charles-Norris. Thank you again, Kerry-Ann, for being a very special guest here at the Multi-Hazards podcast. So a little disclaimer I add to every episode. This podcast is meant to be educational and does not try to offer legal, medical, or other specific advice unless otherwise noted. Also, the opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of the organizations that I work for as host or the guests. So, here as I finish this episode, thanks to all of you precious listeners for tuning in today. Stay safe out there and stay tuned for more. This is Vin Nelson wishing you the best on your journey of surviving and thriving with all that life throws at you. Cheers to you all. Peace out.